The thing I remember most about that night wasn't the suitcase. It was how carefully Adam avoided looking at the kitchen table. He just stood there by the front door of that little brick house in Montgomery, holding the same old brown suitcase he used for work trips, shifting his weight like a man waiting for a ride. The hallway light was on behind him, and the house smelled like lemon cleaner because Keisha had wiped down the counters after dinner. Upstairs, their 7-year-old son Isaiah had already fallen asleep. Keisha leaned against the kitchen counter, arms folded, studying Adam like she was trying to understand a stranger. Finally, she asked the question that had been hanging in the room since he walked in. "So, who is she?" Adam rubbed the back of his neck and let out a breath. "She's someone I met through work," he said. "She just makes me feel alive again." Keisha didn't move. She didn't shout. She didn't even look angry. After a moment, she asked quietly, "How old is she?" Adam hesitated. Then he said it. 25. For a second, the only sound in the house was the hum of the refrigerator. Keisha nodded slowly, like a person who had just solved a puzzle. And the strange thing, the thing Adam didn't understand at all, was how calm she suddenly looked. Almost certain, like she already knew something about the future he was walking into, and he had absolutely no idea what it was. Welcome to Mr. Graham's story, my beautiful, amazing family. Y'all have been so supportive, and I promise to always do my best to give you the best as I learn and improve every day. If this is your first time watching, comment below with where you're watching from, and subscribe to officially join the family. Montgomery mornings had a certain rhythm to them, especially on Sundays. By 8 o'clock, the streets around Cedar Hill Drive were already alive with small, familiar sounds. A screen door slamming somewhere down the block, a pickup truck warming up in a driveway, the distant hum of gospel music drifting from someone's open window. Keisha Carter usually stepped outside around that time with a mug of coffee in her hand. Their house wasn't flashy, just a neat red brick place with a small front porch and 2 crepe myrtle trees that burst into pink blossoms every summer. The yard stayed trimmed, the flower beds were tidy, and the American flag Adam insisted on hanging by the garage never looked worn or crooked. People in the neighborhood noticed things like that. Mrs. Donnelly from across the street liked to say the Carter house always looked put together, and in a lot of ways, it was. Inside the house, the kitchen lights were on. Isaiah's small sneakers were by the door where he had kicked them off the night before. A bowl with dried cereal flakes sat in the sink, because Adam had promised to wash it before bed and forgotten. Normal things. Ordinary life. Keisha stood at the counter finishing Isaiah's breakfast when Adam walked in tying the knot of his tie. "You see my watch?" he asked. Keisha didn't turn around right away. She reached into the small wooden tray beside the refrigerator and held it up. "You mean the one you left here again?" Adam smiled sheepishly as he took it. "I swear I had it last night. You say that every Sunday." He leaned over and kissed her cheek before heading toward the hallway. Isaiah came running down the stairs a moment later, one sock on and the other dangling from his hand. "Mom, Dad said I could bring the Lego car to Grandma's today." Adam's voice floated back from the bedroom. "I said maybe." Isaiah groaned dramatically. "You always change it." Keisha laughed softly and crouched down to help him pull the second sock on. "Well," she said, smoothing the fabric around his ankle, "maybe if you finish your pancakes first." Isaiah immediately ran back to the table. Moments like that were the ones neighbors saw when they glanced through the open front door. A family, simple, steady, the kind of household people assumed had figured life out. By 9:30, the 3 of them were climbing into Adam's silver truck heading toward church. Keisha sat in the passenger seat adjusting Isaiah's collar, while Adam drove with one hand resting on the steering wheel. Traffic moved slowly down Atlanta Highway. A line of cars filled with families headed in the same direction. Adam tapped the wheel impatiently. "Every week," he muttered. Keisha glanced over. "What?" "This traffic. It gets worse every year." She smiled slightly. "That's because everyone's going to the same place we are." He didn't answer. His eyes stayed fixed on the road ahead. At church, the Carters always sat in the same pew, 3 rows from the front on the left side. People greeted them as they walked in. "Morning, Adam." "Hey, Keisha, you look beautiful today." "Isaiah, you getting tall on us." Isaiah loved that part. He waved at everyone, like a little mayor making his rounds. During the service, Keisha usually kept one hand resting lightly on Isaiah's shoulder, while Adam sat beside them with his arms folded, listening quietly. From the outside, nothing looked unusual, but sometimes the smallest things reveal more than people realize, like the way Adam checked his phone more often lately, or how his attention drifted during conversations that used to hold him. After church, families gathered outside in the parking lot under the warm Alabama sun. Men talked about work. Women shared recipes and updates about their kids. Children ran between the cars laughing. Adam stood near a group of men discussing a new warehouse contract his company had taken on. "More responsibility," he said, rubbing the back of his neck. "But the pay's about the same." One of the men chuckled. "That's how they get you." Adam forced a smile. Across the parking lot, Keisha watched him while Isaiah chased a friend around the sidewalk. She had always been good at noticing things most people missed, and lately, something about Adam felt heavier, not angry, not distant exactly, just restless. That evening, the family gathered at Loretta's house for Sunday dinner, the way they had for years. Loretta believed strongly in traditions. If the week gets messy, she liked to say, Sunday dinner brings people back to themselves. Her house smelled like fried chicken and collard greens before you even stepped through the door. Isaiah ran straight to the kitchen. "Grandma, I'm starving." Loretta laughed. "Well, good. That means I did my job." Adam sat at the table while Keisha helped her mother carry dishes from the stove. Loretta leaned close to Keisha while placing a bowl of mashed potatoes on the counter. "How's everything going, baby?" Keisha paused for just a second. "Fine," she said. Loretta studied her daughter's face for a moment. Mothers notice things too, but she didn't push. Dinner was loud and warm and full of laughter. Adam told a story about a forklift driver at work who accidentally knocked over an entire stack of boxes. Isaiah tried to imitate the sound of the crash, making everyone laugh harder. For a while, everything felt exactly the way it always had. But later that night, after Isaiah had fallen asleep in the back seat on the ride home, Adam drove quietly through the dim streets. Keisha looked out the window at the passing houses. "You've been quiet today," she said gently. Adam shrugged. "Just tired. You've been saying that a lot lately." He kept his eyes on the road. "Work's been crazy." Keisha didn't respond right away. The truck turned onto their street. The crepe myrtles outside their house swayed lightly in the night breeze. Adam parked in the driveway and turned off the engine. Neither of them moved for a moment. Then he sighed. "You ever feel like life just plateaus?" he asked suddenly. Keisha turned her head. "What do you mean?" "I don't know," he said, staring out the windshield. "Like everything's just the same all the time." She thought about that for a second. The same isn't always a bad thing. Adam didn't argue, but something in his silence lingered. Keisha stepped out of the truck and gently lifted Isaiah from the back seat. He rested his head on her shoulder as she carried him inside. Adam followed a few steps behind. From the outside, nothing about the Carter family looked different that night. The porch light glowed softly. The front door closed, like it always did, and the quiet brick house settled into another peaceful evening. But sometimes the first crack in a life doesn't make a loud sound. Sometimes it begins with a simple feeling someone doesn't know how to name. And inside Adam Carter, that feeling had already started to grow. The house where Keisha grew up sat on the west side of Montgomery, tucked between two oak trees that had been there longer than anyone in the neighborhood could remember. It wasn't a big house. 2 bedrooms, 1 bathroom, a narrow kitchen with cabinets that had been painted so many times the corners felt soft when you touched them. But the house always smelled like food and fabric softener, and there was almost always someone laughing somewhere inside. Keisha's mother, Loretta, believed a home didn't need to be big to be full. It just needed people who cared about each other. Most mornings when Keisha was a little girl, she woke up before the sun came up because Loretta was already moving around the kitchen. The sound of a skillet warming on the stove usually did it. Keisha would wander in rubbing sleep from her eyes and find her mother tying a scarf around her hair while scrambling eggs. "You're up early again," Loretta would say without looking over. "You're louder than you think," Keisha would mumble. Loretta laughed every time. She worked more hours than anyone Keisha knew. First shift at the hospital cafeteria downtown. Then some evenings she cleaned offices in a tall glass building near the river. Keisha didn't fully understand how exhausting that schedule was until she was much older. Back then she only knew that her mother somehow still had energy to help with homework, cook dinner, and sit with her at the kitchen table braiding her hair before bed. Those moments at the table were where most of Loretta's lessons happened. The radio would be playing softly in the background, while Loretta carefully separated strands of hair between her fingers. "You paying attention in school?" She'd ask. "Yes, ma'am." "Math still easy for you?" Keisha nodded. "I like numbers." Loretta smiled at that. "Good. Numbers don't lie. People sometimes do." Keisha used to laugh when her mother said things like that. But Loretta wasn't joking. She believed strongly in preparation, in understanding the world clearly, and in never letting other people decide what you were worth. One night when Keisha was about 12, Loretta paused in the middle of braiding her hair. "Baby," she said quietly, "people might underestimate you someday." Keisha turned slightly. "Why?" "Because that's what people do when they don't know your whole story." Loretta tied off the braid and rested her hands on Keisha's shoulders. "But that's not your problem," she continued. "Your job is to know exactly who you are. The rest will take care of itself." Keisha carried those words with her for the rest of her life. They shaped how she thought, how she worked, and how carefully she chose the people she trusted. By the time Keisha reached high school, teachers had already noticed she had a sharp mind for numbers. One math teacher pulled Loretta aside after a parent meeting. "Your daughter's got real talent," he said. Loretta smiled politely, but didn't seem surprised. "I know she does." Keisha eventually earned scholarships that allowed her to attend college without drowning in debt. Loretta cried the day Keisha moved into her dorm, not because she was sad, but because she knew how much work it had taken to reach that moment. "Go build something beautiful," she told her daughter, hugging her tight. Keisha promised she would. It was during those college years that she first met Adam. She was barely 18. Adam was older by a few years and had just moved to Alabama from Tennessee after landing a job with a logistics company that handled warehouse distribution. They met in a quiet, ordinary way, at a small diner near campus, where Keisha sometimes studied after evening classes. Adam had taken the booth behind her one night. At some point, he leaned over slightly. "Sorry to interrupt," he said politely, "but do you mind if I ask what you're studying?" Keisha looked up from her notebook. "Accounting." Adam nodded. "That explains the numbers everywhere." She smiled a little. "Do they bother you?" "Not at all," he said. "I just don't understand them." That made her laugh. Their first conversation lasted maybe 15 minutes. Nothing dramatic, nothing particularly romantic, but something about Adam felt steady. He listened carefully when she spoke. Not the kind of listening where someone is just waiting for their turn to talk. The kind where someone actually absorbs what you're saying. That mattered to Keisha. Over the next few months, they started seeing each other more often. Dinner sometimes, coffee on weekends, long conversations about their families and the lives they hoped to build. Adam admired her discipline, her focus, and the quiet confidence she carried without showing off. Keisha appreciated Adam's stability. He worked hard. He talked about building a future, about having a family someday. For someone who grew up watching her mother carry so much responsibility alone, those things meant a lot. By the time Keisha finished college, Adam had already settled into his role managing operations at a regional warehouse. The job wasn't glamorous, but it was stable, and Adam took pride in that. They married not long after Keisha turned 22. The ceremony was simple, held in the same church Keisha had attended most of her childhood. Loretta cried again that day too. During the reception, she pulled Adam aside near the punch bowl. "I raised my daughter to be strong," she told him calmly. Adam nodded respectfully. "I know you did." Loretta looked him straight in the eyes. "Make sure you respect that strength," she said. Adam didn't fully understand the weight of those words at the time, but Keisha did. She always did. In the early years of their marriage, life moved forward the way most young couples hope it will. Small apartments, shared grocery lists, late nights talking about dreams and plans. Adam worked long hours building his career. Keisha started building her own path quietly, using her skills with finance to help small businesses organize their books and improve their investments. Most people assumed she was doing basic bookkeeping. She never bothered correcting them, not because she was hiding something, but because she liked the simplicity of being underestimated. It kept life peaceful, and for many years, that peace felt real. Adam supported her, she supported him, and together they slowly built a life that seemed solid from every angle, which was exactly why what came later would feel so impossible to believe, because trust, once built over decades, doesn't usually look fragile. It looks permanent, until the moment someone decides it isn't. Adam Carter didn't grow up in a place where people talked much about emotions. He grew up in a small town outside Nashville, where most conversations between men happened while fixing something, loading something, or watching a football game. Feelings were rarely the topic. Work was. His father, Harold Carter, owned a modest hardware store that sat on the corner of Main Street and Oak Ridge Road. It had been there for almost 40 years, long enough that most of the town knew the smell the moment they walked in. Metal, sawdust, motor oil. Adam spent a lot of his childhood inside that store. Some kids played video games after school. Adam stocked shelves. His father believed idle time made boys soft. "Grab that box of bolts," Harold would say, pointing toward the back room without even looking up. Adam would carry the box to the front counter and begin sorting them into labeled bins. There was never much conversation during those moments, just work. One afternoon when Adam was about 13, a customer walked into the store complaining about the price of a tool. Harold listened patiently for a few seconds before calmly explaining that the price was fair. The man shook his head and walked out anyway. Adam watched the door close and frowned. "Why didn't you argue with him?" he asked. Harold shrugged. "A man who wants to leave is already halfway gone." Adam didn't fully understand what his father meant at the time, but he remembered the tone in his voice. Firm, certain. That was how Harold approached most things. Life wasn't about comfort. It was about responsibility. By the time Adam reached high school, his father had already made one thing very clear. "A man's job is to provide," Harold told him one evening while they locked up the store. Adam nodded automatically. Harold handed him the keys. "You take care of your family, and everything else will sort itself out." Those words stayed with Adam long after he left Tennessee. He carried them into adulthood, like instructions written somewhere deep inside his mind. When Adam moved to Alabama for work in his 20s, he believed he was doing exactly what his father had raised him to do. He found steady employment in warehouse logistics. The job required organization, patience, and long hours, coordinating shipments and managing teams of drivers. It wasn't glamorous, but Adam didn't care about glamorous. He cared about stability, and for a long time, stability was enough. When he met Keisha at that diner near her college campus, something about her immediately felt grounding. She was thoughtful, focused, and she spoke about the future in ways that made it sound possible. Adam admired that. After they married, he threw himself into work even harder. Promotions came slowly, but steadily. First shift supervisor, then operations coordinator, eventually warehouse manager. Each step upward felt like confirmation that he was doing what he was supposed to do, providing, supporting his family, being the kind of man his father had always described. But somewhere along the way, something subtle began to change. Not suddenly, not dramatically, just small things. Work responsibilities grew heavier, longer hours, more pressure. The logistics company expanded, which meant more shipments, tighter deadlines, and constant expectations to improve efficiency. Adam handled the pressure the only way he knew how, by pushing harder. But the more he focused on work, the more life outside the warehouse began to feel repetitive. Same morning routine, same drive to the same building, same conversations about inventory numbers and shipping delays. Then home again, dinner, television, sleep, repeat. At first he told himself this was simply adulthood. Everyone lived this way. But the thought kept returning. Is this it? One evening after Isaiah had gone to bed, Adam sat on the couch staring at the muted television while Keisha folded laundry nearby. He looked around the living room, the framed family photos, the toys scattered near the coffee table, the comfortable couch they had owned for almost 10 years. Everything in the room represented a life they had built carefully together. Yet something inside Adam felt unsettled. "Do you ever feel like things just stop changing?" he asked suddenly. Keisha looked up from the stack of towels in her hands. "What do you mean?" Adam rubbed his forehead. "I don't know. Like we've just hit some kind of plateau." Keisha considered the question thoughtfully. "Most people spend their whole lives trying to reach stability," she said calmly. "Why would that bother you?" Adam didn't have a clear answer. because it wasn't stability itself that bothered him. It was the quiet fear that maybe he had already reached the highest point his life would ever climb. The promotions had slowed. The pay increases weren't as dramatic as they used to be. New younger employees were arriving with business degrees and fresh ideas. Adam sometimes wondered how long it would take before someone younger replaced him. He never voiced those fears out loud. Men in his family didn't talk about insecurity, but the feeling began sitting quietly in the back of his mind, waiting. At the same time, Keisha seemed perfectly content with their life. She worked from home most days, often sitting at her desk in the spare bedroom, reviewing financial reports for various clients. When Adam asked about her work, she described it simply, just helping businesses organize their numbers. He never questioned it. Numbers bored him, and Keisha always handled her responsibilities with quiet confidence. From his perspective, their roles were clear. He worked outside the home. She managed things inside it. The balance seemed natural, which was exactly why Adam never realized how much he had begun measuring his own worth by the progress of his career. And when that progress slowed, the restlessness inside him grew stronger. It showed itself in small ways: impatience during conversations, longer hours at work even when they weren't necessary, moments when he stared at the road ahead while driving home, wondering if something in his life was missing. Keisha noticed those changes, but she didn't confront him, not yet. She believed something else. Sometimes people needed space to understand their own feelings, so she watched quietly and waited. What neither of them realized was that the dissatisfaction slowly building inside Adam would soon meet the exact kind of attention that could turn confusion into something far more dangerous. And when that moment arrived, the life they had spent nearly 20 years building would begin to crack in ways neither of them were prepared for. The email about the training seminar arrived on a Tuesday afternoon while Adam was reviewing shipment reports at his desk. The subject line read, "Regional Operations Leadership Workshop, Birmingham." Adam almost ignored it. Workshops usually meant long presentations, bad coffee, and a hotel conference room full of managers pretending to be interested in corporate buzzwords. But his supervisor had already marked it as recommended, which meant it wasn't really optional. 2 weeks later, Adam found himself driving north on Interstate 65 just after sunrise, the highway stretching ahead through rolling green hills. The radio played quietly, while the early morning light slid across the windshield. He had left Montgomery before Isaiah woke up. Keisha had been in the kitchen pouring coffee when he grabbed his travel bag. "You'll be back tomorrow night?" she asked. "Yeah," Adam said, slipping his jacket on. She handed him a travel mug. "Drive safe." He kissed her lightly on the cheek before heading out the door. It was a simple moment. The kind couple shared thousands of times without thinking much about it. By mid-morning, Adam had reached downtown Birmingham. The seminar was being held in a tall glass hotel overlooking the city center. Inside the conference room, rows of round tables had been arranged with notebooks and pens placed neatly at each seat. Managers from different warehouses around the region filtered in slowly, carrying laptops and cups of coffee. Adam recognized a few faces. Most were strangers. He took a seat near the back of the room. The morning session started with a presentation about supply chain efficiency that sounded almost identical to the last workshop he had attended 3 years earlier. Adam leaned back in his chair and glanced around the room. Some people were typing notes. Others were scrolling quietly through their phones under the table. Then the door opened again. A young woman walked in carrying a tablet and a cup of coffee. She paused briefly near the entrance, scanning the room as if trying to find an empty seat. Her hair was pulled into a loose ponytail, and she wore a navy blazer that looked slightly too formal for someone her age. She noticed the empty chair beside Adam and walked over. "Is this seat taken?" she asked. Adam shook his head. "Nope." She smiled and sat down. "Thanks. I thought I was late." "You're right on time," Adam said, nodding toward the presenter who was still fumbling with the projector. The woman laughed quietly. "I swear these things always start 10 minutes after they're supposed to." Adam chuckled. "First seminar?" "First one like this," she said. "I just joined the company a few months ago." Adam nodded politely. "I'm Adam." "Chloe," she said, extending her hand. Her handshake was quick and confident. The presentation continued, but the two of them ended up whispering occasional comments back and forth about the slides on the screen. When the presenter started explaining a complicated spreadsheet system, Chloe leaned slightly toward Adam. "Does anyone actually use half of these charts?" she whispered. Adam smirked. Not unless they're trying to impress someone. She laughed softly again. That laugh had an easy, effortless quality to it, the kind of sound that made even dull moments feel lighter. During the first break, people gathered around a long table near the back of the room where coffee and pastries had been set out. Adam poured himself another cup, while Chloe grabbed a muffin. "So, how long have you been with the company?" she asked. "Almost 20 years, Adam replied. Her eyes widened. "Seriously?" "Yeah." "Wow," she said. "That's impressive." Adam shrugged. "Just stayed long enough to keep getting promoted." Chloe shook her head. "Still, that kind of experience is rare." Adam wasn't used to hearing admiration like that from younger employees. Most of the new hires spoke more confidently about modern logistics software than he did, but Chloe seemed genuinely impressed. "What about you?" he asked. She leaned casually against the table. "I graduated last year," she said. "Business management." "Straight into corporate training?" "Pretty much," she said. "They rotate us through different departments for a while." Adam nodded. "You'll learn fast." "I hope so," Chloe said. Then she studied him for a second. "You seem like someone who knows what they're doing." Adam smiled faintly. "After 20 years, you pick up a few things." They walked back into the conference room together when the next session started. For the rest of the afternoon, the workshop continued with group exercises and management scenarios. At one point, the instructor divided everyone into small teams to solve a simulated logistics problem. Chloe ended up in Adam's group. She leaned toward him while reviewing the printed scenario. "You're the expert," she said. "What do you think?" Adam explained his approach calmly. Within a few minutes, the rest of the group had agreed with his plan. When the instructor reviewed their answer later, he nodded approvingly. "That's exactly how this situation should be handled." Chloe turned toward Adam with a grin. "See? I knew you knew what you were doing." Adam laughed. "It's not that complicated." "Maybe for you," she said. The day ended around 5 in the evening. As people packed their bags and prepared to leave, Chloe slipped her tablet into her purse. "So," she said casually, "are you heading back tonight, or staying in the hotel?" "Staying," Adam replied. "They booked rooms for everyone." She nodded. "Same here." For a moment, neither of them spoke. Then Chloe gestured toward the elevator. "I heard there's a pretty good restaurant downstairs," she said. "A few of us are thinking about grabbing dinner." Adam hesitated. He hadn't planned on socializing. Usually he ate something quick in his room during work trips, but the thought of sitting alone suddenly felt less appealing. "Sure," he said finally. "Why not?" Chloe smiled. "Great." Neither of them realized it in that moment. But sometimes the turning points in a person's life don't arrive with warning signs. They begin with something as ordinary as a casual conversation during a break in a conference room. And for Adam Carter, that simple introduction was the first small crack in the life he had spent years building. The restaurant inside the hotel had the kind of atmosphere designed for business travelers. Soft lighting, muted conversations, the quiet clinking of glasses and silverware. Adam followed Chloe and 2 other employees from the seminar to a table near the window overlooking the Birmingham skyline. The sun had already begun dipping behind the buildings, turning the sky a soft orange that reflected faintly off the glass towers outside. The group ordered drinks and appetizers. At first, the conversation stayed focused on work, shipping delays, training schedules, which departments were the most chaotic. Adam noticed Chloe listened closely whenever he spoke, the same way Keisha used to listen when they first started dating, not interrupting, not checking her phone, just paying attention. When one of the other employees excused himself to take a phone call, and the other stepped away to use the restroom, the conversation shifted. Chloe leaned her elbows lightly on the table. "So," she said, 20 years with the same company. That's serious commitment." Adam shrugged. "I guess so. You must really love the work." Adam gave a small laugh. Love might be a strong word. She tilted her head slightly. "Then why stay?" The question caught him off guard. No one had asked him that in a long time. "I don't know," he said honestly. "Stability, I guess." "That sounds responsible," Chloe said. There was something about the way she said the word responsible that made it sound both admirable and slightly boring at the same time. Adam noticed that, but instead of pushing the thought away, he found himself explaining more. "I've got a family," he added. a wife, and a son. Chloe smiled. That's nice. Yeah, Adam said. She stirred the ice in her glass thoughtfully. How old is your son? 7. Cute age, she said. Old enough to talk, but not old enough to get embarrassed by their parents yet. Adam chuckled. That stage is coming soon enough. The other 2 employees returned to the table then, and the conversation drifted back to lighter topics. But as the evening went on, Adam noticed Chloe had a way of drawing him back into conversation whenever the group quieted down. She asked questions, not superficial ones. Questions about how warehouse operations actually worked, about leadership decisions, about the hardest parts of managing employees. You must have seen everything by now, she said at one point. Pretty close, Adam replied. That's impressive. Again, that word, impressive. Adam realized he hadn't heard that word directed at him in a long time. At work, experience often went unnoticed. At home, routines replaced compliments. No one meant harm by it. Life just moved on. But Chloe seemed genuinely fascinated by the path he had built. By the time dinner ended, the group walked back toward the elevators together. When they reached the hallway outside the guest rooms, the others said goodnight and disappeared down different corridors. Adam pressed the elevator button. Chloe stood beside him, scrolling briefly through her phone. You know, she said suddenly, glancing up, most guys my age have no idea what they're doing yet. Adam raised an eyebrow. What makes you say that? They talk a lot, she said, slipping her phone back into her purse. But there's not much substance behind it. The elevator doors opened. They stepped inside. Chloe continued. But you're different. Adam looked at her. How so? You're confident, she said simply. You actually know things. Adam laughed awkwardly. I'm just older. That's part of it, she admitted. But it's more than that. The elevator reached Chloe's floor. The doors slid open. She stepped halfway out, then turned back. Well, she said with a small smile. Good night, Adam. Good night. The doors closed again as the elevator continued upward. Adam leaned back against the wall and stared at the numbers lighting up above the door. For some reason, the conversation lingered in his mind. Not because anything inappropriate had happened. Nothing had. But there was something about the way Chloe looked at him. Like he represented something exciting, something capable. By the time Adam reached his room, he was still thinking about it. He loosened his tie and sat down on the edge of the bed. The quiet hotel room felt strangely empty. He pulled out his phone and saw a text message from Keisha. Did you make it to Birmingham okay? Adam typed back quickly. Yeah. Seminar was long but fine. Heading to bed soon. A few seconds later, she responded. Drive safe. Coming home tomorrow. Isaiah already asked if you're bringing him something from the trip. Adam smiled faintly. I'll grab him something in the morning. He set the phone down. For a moment, he pictured Keisha sitting at the kitchen table back home, probably helping Isaiah with homework or folding laundry. The image felt familiar, comfortable. But as Adam lay back against the pillows, another thought quietly slipped into his mind. Chloe's voice in the elevator. You're different. It wasn't the words themselves that lingered. It was the feeling behind them. Admiration, attention, something that made Adam feel noticed again. He stared at the ceiling for a long time before finally turning off the light. And somewhere in the back of his mind, a subtle shift had already begun. Not because he had stopped loving his wife, but because he had started enjoying how someone else saw him. And sometimes that small change is where the real danger begins. Because the moment a person begins rewriting their own story, they often stop seeing the truth that was there all along. Adam drove back to Montgomery the next afternoon with the radio playing low and the highway stretching long and straight ahead of him. The Birmingham skyline slowly disappeared in his rearview mirror, replaced by miles of trees and open road. For the first hour, his mind stayed focused on ordinary things. Traffic, work schedules, the shipment delays waiting for him back at the warehouse on Monday. But every so often, another thought slipped in. A laugh in a hotel restaurant. A casual compliment in an elevator. The way Chloe had looked at him when she said he was different. Adam shook his head slightly and turned the radio up a little louder. It was nothing, just a conversation. People met new coworkers all the time. There was no reason to keep thinking about it. Still, the memory lingered longer than he expected. By the time he reached Montgomery that evening, the sky had turned soft gray, and the streetlights were already flickering on. He pulled into the driveway of the brick house just after 6. Inside, Keisha was standing at the stove when she heard the door open. Isaiah ran into the hallway the moment he heard Adam's voice. "Dad!" Adam barely had time to drop his travel bag before Isaiah crashed into him with a hug. "You bring me something?" Adam laughed. "Hello to you too." He reached into his bag and pulled out a small toy truck he had grabbed from a gift shop near the hotel lobby. Isaiah's eyes lit up immediately. "This one's bigger than my other one. Thought you might like it." Isaiah ran back toward the living room to show it to his action figures. Keisha walked over from the kitchen, wiping her hands on a towel. "How was Birmingham?" she asked. "Same kind of seminar as always," Adam said, hanging his jacket by the door. "Long?" "Very." She nodded and handed him a glass of water. "Dinner's almost ready." Adam took a sip and leaned against the counter. For a moment, everything felt completely normal. The smell of food cooking, Isaiah's toy trucks rumbling across the living room floor, Keisha moving calmly around the kitchen the way she always did. But something inside Adam felt slightly detached, like he had returned physically, but part of his mind was still somewhere else. At dinner, Isaiah spent most of the time explaining the imaginary construction site he was building on the living room rug. Adam nodded along, smiling when appropriate. But Keisha noticed something. His responses were shorter than usual. His attention drifted. After Isaiah went upstairs to brush his teeth, Keisha began rinsing plates at the sink. Adam sat at the table scrolling through his phone. "Did you learn anything useful at the seminar?" she asked casually. Adam shrugged. "Same leadership stuff they always talk about. Meet anyone interesting?" The question made Adam pause for half a second. "Just people from other warehouses." Keisha nodded. She wasn't interrogating him, just making conversation. But Adam suddenly felt oddly uncomfortable, not guilty, just aware. Later that night, after Isaiah was asleep, Adam sat on the couch watching television while Keisha finished answering emails at her desk in the spare bedroom. Around 10 o'clock, she stepped into the living room. "You're still up?" she asked. "Yeah, just finishing this show." She sat down beside him. Isaiah asked if you're coming to his school assembly on Friday. Adam frowned slightly. "What time is it?" 10 in the morning. He rubbed his chin. "I've got inventory meetings that day." Keisha looked at him quietly. "He's been practicing a presentation for 2 weeks. Adam sighed. "I'll see what I can do." She didn't argue. She just nodded and stood up. "Don't stay up too late." After she went to bed, Adam sat there a little longer staring at the muted television. Eventually, he picked up his phone again. There was a new notification, a LinkedIn connection request from Chloe. He hesitated for a second before accepting it. A few seconds later, a message popped up. "Chloe, nice meeting you this week. I learned a lot from your ideas during the group session." Adam stared at the screen. Then he typed back, "Adam, good meeting you too. Glad the seminar was useful." The response came almost immediately. "Chloe, it was, especially hearing how someone with real experience approaches things." Adam leaned back slightly. Something about the conversation felt light, easy, nothing inappropriate, just professional. But as the messages continued over the next few minutes, Adam noticed something else. Chloe asked questions about leadership, about decision-making, about how he handled difficult situations at work. Each question carried the same quiet admiration he had felt during the seminar. Eventually, Adam glanced toward the hallway. The bedroom light had already been turned off. Keisha was asleep. He looked back at his phone. Another message had arrived. "Chloe, you know, it's rare to meet someone who actually enjoys mentoring people." Adam hesitated before responding. He hadn't thought of it as mentoring, just conversation. But hearing it described that way felt strangely satisfying. He typed back, "Adam, happy to help if I can." The conversation continued for another 20 minutes. Then Adam finally set his phone down and turned off the television. When he walked quietly into the bedroom, Keisha was already asleep on her side of the bed. The soft glow from the hallway light illuminated part of her face. For a moment, Adam stood there watching her. They had shared nearly 20 years of life together. College years, first apartments, the birth of their son, all the routines and responsibilities that built a life. And yet, something subtle had begun shifting, not in a way that felt dramatic, not yet, Just small changes. More time on his phone, shorter conversations, thoughts drifting elsewhere. Keisha noticed those changes over the next few weeks. Adam stayed later at work, answered questions with fewer words, sometimes stared at his phone with a faint smile before quickly setting it down when she entered the room. She didn't confront him, not because she was unaware, but because Keisha had always believed something important about people. If someone is moving away from you emotionally, you can't force them back. All you can do is watch carefully and wait to see where they're going. What she didn't know yet was that the quiet distance beginning to grow inside her own home would soon lead to the moment that changed everything. The evening started like hundreds of other evenings in the Carter house. Keisha was in the kitchen wiping down the counters after dinner. The lemon cleaner she liked left the whole room smelling fresh, the way it always did after she finished straightening up. Isaiah was upstairs in his room, his voice floating faintly down the hallway as he talked to himself while building something out of Legos. Adam stood near the front door, holding a suitcase, the same brown suitcase he usually took on overnight work trips. At first, Keisha didn't notice anything unusual about it. He traveled occasionally for warehouse conferences and supplier meetings. It wasn't strange to see him packing, but something about the way he was standing caught her attention. Adam wasn't moving. He just stood there near the doorway, gripping the suitcase handle like someone waiting for permission to leave. Keisha leaned against the counter and studied him quietly. "Are you going somewhere?" she asked. Adam didn't answer right away. He rubbed the back of his neck and glanced toward the staircase, as if checking whether Isaiah might come down. Then he looked back at Keisha. "There's something I need to talk to you about." The tone in his voice made the room feel smaller. Keisha set the cleaning cloth down slowly. "Okay." Adam took a breath. I think it would be better if I moved out for a while." The words landed in the air between them, heavy and strange. Keisha frowned slightly. "Moved out?" Adam shifted his weight from one foot to the other. "I've been doing a lot of thinking lately," he said. Keisha folded her arms. "What kind of thinking?" Adam hesitated. The explanation he had rehearsed in his head suddenly felt childish now that he was standing in front of the woman he had spent nearly 2 decades with. But the decision had already been made. "I met someone," he said. The sentence came out faster than he expected. For a moment, Keisha didn't react. Her face didn't change. Her voice stayed calm. "What do you mean?" "Someone." Adam looked down at the floor. "At that seminar in Birmingham," he said quietly. "We started talking. Things just kind of happened." The refrigerator hummed softly in the background. Upstairs, Isaiah dropped something that made a loud plastic clatter. Neither of them moved. Keisha stared at Adam like she was trying to understand a language she had never heard before. "You're telling me you're leaving your family because you met someone at a work seminar?" Adam swallowed. "It's not just that." "Then explain it to me." Adam opened his mouth, closed it again. "How do you explain a feeling that barely makes sense, even to yourself?" "She makes me feel alive again," he said finally. The words sounded shallow the moment they left his mouth. Keisha blinked slowly. "Alive." Adam nodded weakly. "Yes." For a long moment, the only sound in the kitchen was the ticking of the small wall clock above the stove. Then Keisha asked a question that Adam hadn't expected. "How old is she?" Adam hesitated. He had hoped that part wouldn't come up immediately, but there was no point avoiding it now. 25, he said quietly. The number hung in the room like something fragile. Keisha didn't yell. She didn't throw anything. She didn't even raise her voice. Instead, something in her expression changed. Not anger, something more like clarity. 25, she repeated softly. Adam nodded. Another long silence passed between them. Keisha slowly pushed away from the counter and walked toward the kitchen table. She pulled out a chair and sat down. Adam stayed near the door. For the first time since the conversation began, he looked uncertain. "Aren't you going to say anything?" he asked. Keisha rested her hands calmly on the table. "I'm thinking." Adam shifted uncomfortably. "I didn't plan for this to happen." Keisha let out a small breath. "No one ever does." Another silence settled in. Upstairs, Isaiah's bedroom door creaked open. His small footsteps moved across the hallway. "Mom?" He called down the stairs. "Where's my blue Lego piece?" Keisha glanced toward the staircase. "It's probably under your bed," she called back gently. "Okay." His footsteps disappeared again. When the house went quiet, Keisha looked back at Adam. "You understand what you're saying, right?" she asked calmly. Adam nodded. "I know, it's not fair. That's not the word I would use." Adam looked away. Keisha studied him carefully. For almost 20 years she had known this man. She had watched him become a father, watched him work long hours to support their family, watched him laugh with their son and fall asleep on the couch during late-night movies. And now he was standing near the door, holding a suitcase like a stranger checking out of a hotel. "When did you decide this?" she asked. Adam rubbed his hands together nervously. "I don't know. A few weeks ago, maybe." "A few weeks," Keisha repeated. "That's how long it took you to throw away 20 years. Adam flinched slightly. "It's not like that." "No?" she asked quietly. "Then what is it like?" Adam had no answer. The truth was messy, confusing, and impossible to explain without sounding selfish. Keisha watched his silence for a moment. Then she nodded slowly. "Well," she said calmly, "if you're going to leave, you should probably go now." Adam looked surprised. "You're not even going to try to stop me?" Keisha shook her head. "You already made your decision." He shifted the suitcase slightly. "I thought you'd be more upset." Keisha stood up from the table. "Oh, I'm upset," she said softly, "but not in the way you think." She walked toward the front door and opened it. The cool evening air drifted inside. Then she looked back at him. "If you walk out that door tonight," she said calmly, "don't expect to come back the same way." Adam frowned. "What does that mean?" Keisha held his gaze. "It means choices change things." Adam hesitated for a moment. Then he stepped forward and walked past her onto the porch. The night air felt colder than he expected. Behind him, Keisha stood quietly in the doorway. Adam turned once as if considering saying something else, but no words came, so he walked to his car. The engine started, headlights swept across the front yard. Then the car pulled away from the curb and disappeared down the street. Keisha stood in the doorway for several seconds after the sound of the engine faded. The house behind her felt suddenly too quiet. Upstairs, Isaiah's voice drifted down again. "Mom, did you find the Lego piece?" Keisha closed the front door slowly. Then she walked toward the staircase. "I'm coming," she said gently. And in that moment, she understood something Adam had not yet realized. The marriage hadn't just cracked. It had broken, and some things, once broken, never returned to the shape they had before. After Adam's car disappeared down the street, the house felt different. Not louder, not quieter, just hollow. Keisha stood in the living room for a moment, with her hand still resting on the doorknob, listening to the faint ticking of the clock on the wall. Upstairs, Isaiah's footsteps moved across the floor. He was still looking for that Lego piece, still living inside a normal evening. Keisha took a slow breath and walked toward the stairs. Halfway up, she paused briefly, not because she felt like crying, but because she needed a second to gather herself. Loretta had always told her something important about difficult moments. Children remember how adults behave when things go wrong. So Keisha wiped her hands against the sides of her dress and finished climbing the stairs. Isaiah was lying on his stomach on the floor of his bedroom, peering under the bed with a flashlight. "Mom," he said, still shining the light under the frame. "I think it rolled way back there." Keisha knelt beside him. "Let me see." She reached under the bed and felt around for a second before pulling out the small blue Lego piece. Isaiah's face lit up immediately. "Found it." She handed it to him. "There you go." He snapped it into place on the little structure he had been building. "What were you and Dad talking about downstairs?" he asked casually. The question landed gently but heavily at the same time. Keisha kept her voice steady. "Just grown-up stuff." Isaiah nodded, satisfied with the answer. Kids rarely question simple explanations when their world still feels safe. "Dad already leave for work?" he asked. Keisha paused for half a second. "Yes," she said softly. "He had to go somewhere tonight." Isaiah shrugged. "Okay." He turned back to his Legos without another thought. Keisha sat quietly beside him for a few minutes while he finished building his creation. Then she helped him brush his teeth and tucked him into bed the same way she had every night for years. As she turned off the bedroom light, Isaiah mumbled sleepily, "Tell Dad I finished my tower tomorrow." Keisha nodded, even though he was already drifting off. "I will." She closed the door gently behind her. Downstairs, The house felt even emptier now. Adam's jacket still hung on the hook by the door. His coffee mug from that morning sat beside the sink. The familiar details of his presence were everywhere. Keisha walked slowly through the living room, straightening a pillow that didn't actually need straightening. Then she sat down on the couch. For a long time she simply stared at the quiet room. The television was off. The lamp beside the couch cast a soft yellow circle of light across the coffee table. Everything looked exactly the same, which made the absence feel even heavier. Most people imagine betrayal as something explosive, screaming, crying, doors slamming. But what Keisha felt was something else entirely. Disappointment, not the small kind. The deep kind that settles slowly in your chest, when someone reveals a side of themselves you never expected to see. She leaned back against the couch and closed her eyes for a moment. 20 years of shared life. School graduations, late-night conversations, hospital rooms, mortgage payments, family dinners. All of it suddenly rearranged itself in her mind. Not erased, but viewed through a different lens. Keisha opened her eyes again and looked around the room. Then she stood up and walked toward the kitchen. The counters were already clean, but she wiped them down again anyway. Something about the small motion helped settle her thoughts. After a few minutes, she poured herself a glass of water and leaned against the sink. Her phone buzzed on the counter. It was a message from Loretta. "Loretta, don't forget, Sunday dinner this week. I'm making peach cobbler." Keisha stared at the message for a moment. Her mother had no idea what had just happened. No one did. For the first time that evening, Keisha felt the weight of how many conversations would eventually come. Family, friends, questions, sympathy. But those things could wait. Right now, there was only one responsibility that mattered. Isaiah. She set the phone down without replying and walked toward the staircase again. Standing at the bottom, she listened for a moment. The house had settled into nighttime quiet. Isaiah was asleep. Outside, a distant car passed down the street. Keisha turned off the downstairs lights one by one and headed toward the bedroom. Adam's side of the closet was still full. His shoes lined up neatly near the wall, his watch resting on the dresser. She changed into pajamas and slid into bed without touching any of it. The mattress felt strangely larger, but Keisha didn't cry. Instead, she stared at the ceiling and thought about something Loretta used to say when life knocked people off balance. You don't control what others choose. You only control what you choose next. That thought stayed with her as the hours slowly passed. Adam believed he had just walked away from a marriage. What he didn't understand yet was that he had also walked away from the trust that made that marriage possible. And trust, once broken like that, doesn't come back simply because someone regrets the moment they broke it. By the time Keisha finally fell asleep, one decision had already settled firmly in her mind. Whatever happened next, her focus would remain exactly where it belonged, on protecting the small life still sleeping peacefully upstairs. Everything else would have to wait. Adam didn't drive very far that night before the quiet started bothering him. The road stretched dark ahead of him as he moved through familiar streets, but nothing about the drive felt normal anymore. For years, whenever he left the house in the evening, it had been for something ordinary. A grocery run, a late shift at work, picking Isaiah up from practice. But this time felt different. Final. He turned onto the main road heading toward the apartment complex where Chloe lived, gripping the steering wheel a little tighter than usual. A part of him expected to feel relief, freedom. Instead, there was a strange mixture of excitement and uneasiness sitting in his chest. When he pulled into the parking lot, Chloe's building stood quietly under a row of yellow streetlights. She had texted him earlier with the apartment number, Building C, second floor. Adam stepped out of the car and grabbed the suitcase from the back seat. For a moment, he stood there staring up at the building. The decision he had just made still hadn't fully settled in his mind. He walked up the staircase slowly and knocked on the door. It opened almost immediately. Chloe stood there, wearing a loose sweatshirt and jeans, her hair pulled into a messy bun. "Hey," she said with an easy smile. Adam gave a small nod. "Hey." She stepped aside so he could come in. The apartment smelled faintly like vanilla candles and fresh laundry. Compared to the quiet order of his house with Keisha, the space felt lighter. Music played softly from a speaker in the kitchen. A couple of takeout containers sat on the coffee table. "I wasn't sure when you'd get here," Chloe said, closing the door behind him. Traffic. Adam set his suitcase near the wall. Chloe glanced at it briefly. So, you really did it. The sentence carried a mix of surprise and excitement. Adam shrugged. Yeah. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Then Chloe walked over and wrapped her arms loosely around his waist. I'm glad you came, she said. Adam hugged her back, though the gesture felt slightly awkward at first. Everything about this moment was new, unfamiliar. Chloe pulled away and gestured toward the couch. I ordered Thai food, she said. Hope that's okay. Sounds good. They sat down and opened the containers. The conversation flowed easily. Chloe talked about her work training program, about the people she had met at the seminar, about the places she still wanted to travel someday. Adam listened while eating quietly. It struck him how different the energy felt compared to home. There were no conversations about grocery lists, no reminders about school events, no responsibilities waiting around the corner, just laughter, lightness. You seem quieter than usual tonight, Chloe said at one point, studying him. Adam shrugged. Just a long day. You nervous? She asked playfully. A little. Chloe smiled. Don't be. She leaned back comfortably against the couch. This is a fresh start. Those words lingered in the air for a moment. A fresh start. Adam nodded slowly. That's one way to look at it. The evening continued casually. They watched a movie, shared another round of takeout. Chloe curled up beside him on the couch like it was the most natural thing in the world. And for a few hours, Adam allowed himself to relax into the idea that maybe he had made the right choice. Maybe this new chapter would feel exciting, different, alive. But the cracks began appearing sooner than he expected. The first one was small. Later that night, Chloe mentioned a weekend trip she wanted to take. We should go to Miami sometime, she said brightly. Adam frowned slightly. Miami? Yeah, my friends go all the time. Adam did a quick calculation in his head. Flights, hotels, time off work. That might be expensive, he said carefully. Chloe waved a hand dismissively. It's not that bad if you plan it right. Adam didn't respond. The conversation moved on, but the thought lingered. Later, as they got ready for bed, another small moment appeared. Chloe glanced at his suitcase sitting near the wall. How long do you think you'll stay here? She asked casually. Adam paused. I hadn't really thought about that yet. She tilted her head. Well, my lease is only for this one bedroom. The sentence wasn't hostile, just practical, but it carried a subtle reminder. This arrangement had limits. Adam nodded slowly. We'll figure it out. Chloe smiled again and turned off the bedroom light. Within minutes, she was asleep. Adam lay awake beside her, staring at the ceiling. The apartment felt quiet in a way that was different from his house. Not peaceful, just unfamiliar. His phone buzzed softly on the nightstand. A reminder notification. Isaiah. School assembly Friday. Adam stared at the screen for a long moment before turning the phone face down. Across the room, his suitcase remained half unpacked. For the first time since leaving the house earlier that night, a strange thought crept into his mind. The life he had walked away from wasn't just routine. It had also been structure, responsibility, a foundation built over years. Now he was lying in a small apartment beside a woman who had known him for only a few weeks. And while the excitement still hovered in the air, something else had begun quietly forming beneath it. Doubt. Adam closed his eyes and tried to push the thought away. But deep down, a part of him already sensed something he wasn't ready to admit. The fantasy he had chosen might not be as simple as it looked from the outside. And sometimes the moment you realize that, you're already too far away from the life you left behind. 2 months passed before Adam finally scheduled the appointment with the divorce attorney. During those weeks, life settled into a strange routine that never quite felt stable. Adam drove to work from Chloe's apartment every morning, leaving earlier than he used to because the commute from her side of the city took longer. The warehouse still expected the same performance from him. Shipments had to move. Problems had to be solved. Work didn't pause just because someone's personal life fell apart. But even at the warehouse, Adam felt the shift. Some coworkers had noticed he wasn't wearing his wedding ring anymore. No one asked questions directly, but the glances lingered longer than usual. By the time he returned to the apartment each evening, Chloe was often still working through her training rotations. Sometimes she was excited about something new she had learned. Other times she complained about coworkers who didn't understand the system she had studied in school. Adam listened when he could, but the life they were building together still felt temporary, like furniture placed in a room that wasn't meant to be permanent. One evening, while scrolling through paperwork at the kitchen table, Adam realized something he had been quietly avoiding. If the separation with Keisha was going to become permanent, he needed to handle the legal process. Divorce. Even thinking the word made his chest tighten slightly. Still, practical matters couldn't wait forever. A week later, he walked into a law office in downtown Montgomery. The building sat near the courthouse, a narrow brick structure with tall windows and polished wooden floors that creaked slightly when people walked across them. The receptionist greeted him politely and asked him to take a seat. Adam sat in a leather chair near the wall, glancing around the waiting room. A framed diploma hung behind the reception desk. Several legal books lined the shelves nearby. Everything about the place felt quiet and professional. 10 minutes later, a middle-aged man stepped out of an office and approached him. "Mr. Carter?" Adam stood. "Yes." The man extended his hand. "I'm Daniel Whitaker. Come on back." Adam followed him into a tidy office with a large desk and 2 chairs facing each other. Whitaker sat down and opened a file folder. "So," the lawyer said calmly, adjusting his glasses, "how can I help you today?" Adam cleared his throat. "I'm looking to begin divorce proceedings." Whitaker nodded, as if hearing those words was the most routine thing in the world. "All right, let's start with some basics." He asked a series of straightforward questions. "How long have you been married?" "Almost 20 years. "Children?" "1, 7 years old." Whitaker wrote notes quickly. "And your spouse's name?" "Keisha Carter." The lawyer nodded and continued writing. After a few minutes, he leaned back slightly. "Divorces that involve long marriages typically require a full financial disclosure from both parties," he explained. "Assets, income, investments, property." Adam nodded. "Of course." Whitaker turned a page in the folder. "I've already begun reviewing publicly available records related to your household finances." Adam frowned slightly. "What kind of records?" "Property ownership, corporate filings, investment partnerships." Adam shrugged. "We own the house. I have a retirement account through work. That's about it." Whitaker didn't respond immediately. Instead, he pulled a document from the folder and placed it on the desk. "Mr. Carter," he said carefully, "I need to ask you something before we continue." Adam leaned forward slightly. "What?" The lawyer studied him for a moment. "Are you aware of your wife's business holdings?" Adam blinked. "What do you mean?" Whitaker slid the paper across the desk. Adam looked down at it. At first, the document didn't make much sense. Rows of numbers, legal entity names, investment summaries. Then, his eyes landed on a line near the bottom. Estimated net worth, $1,083,000,000. Adam stared at the number. His brain refused to process it. He let out a short laugh. "That can't be right." Whitaker folded his hands calmly. "These records indicate your wife is the majority owner of a private investment firm registered through several holding companies." Adam shook his head. "You must be looking at the wrong person." Whitaker tapped the paper. "The documentation lists Keisha Carter as the controlling partner." Adam leaned back in his chair. "My wife does bookkeeping," he said slowly. The lawyer's expression remained neutral. "With respect, Mr. Carter, bookkeeping doesn't typically generate this level of capital." Adam felt a strange pressure building in his chest. That number has to be wrong. Whitaker reached into the folder again and pulled out additional documents. These filings show a series of investments made over the past 2 decades. Real estate acquisitions, technology startups, energy partnerships. He slid the pages across the desk. Adam's hands felt slightly numb as he flipped through them. Company names he had never heard of, investment funds, partnership agreements. Each document listed Keisha Carter's name. Over and over again. Adam looked up slowly. "She never told me about any of this." Whitaker studied him carefully. "Sometimes individuals with significant assets choose to keep their financial lives private," he said. Adam shook his head. "She told me she did financial consulting for small businesses." Whitaker nodded. "That may be how she described it." Adam stared down at the documents again. 20 years of marriage, shared homes, shared routines, and somehow this entire world had existed beside him without his knowledge. How is that even possible? Adam asked quietly. Whitaker leaned back in his chair. Mr. Carter, he said calmly, people with strong financial instincts often build wealth gradually through strategic investments. Adam rubbed his forehead. But $1 billion? The lawyer didn't argue. He simply said something that made Adam's stomach sink even further. Your wife appears to be exceptionally skilled. The room suddenly felt smaller. Adam sat there staring at the documents, trying to reconcile the woman he thought he knew with the information in front of him. Keisha, the quiet woman who worked from the spare bedroom, the one who attended church every Sunday, who cleaned the kitchen after dinner, who drove Isaiah to school assemblies, and apparently had built a financial empire while standing beside him. Adam's voice dropped to almost a whisper. Why wouldn't she tell me? Whitaker paused before answering. I can't speak for your wife, he said. Then he added something carefully. But sometimes people choose silence because they want to know that love isn't tied to money. Adam stared at the desk, and for the first time since leaving his home 2 months earlier, a heavy, uncomfortable realization began settling inside him. The woman he walked away from might have been far more extraordinary than he had ever understood. Adam left the law office slowly, like someone walking out of a room where gravity had suddenly changed. The late afternoon air outside felt warmer than it should have. Cars moved through downtown Montgomery the same way they always did. People walked past the courthouse steps, talking on their phones, carrying briefcases, living normal lives. But Adam stood there on the sidewalk for a long moment, holding the folder the lawyer had given him. Inside were copies of the documents, proof, numbers he still didn't fully understand. He opened the folder again, staring at the pages as if they might rearrange themselves into something more believable. They didn't. Keisha's name appeared again and again across the paperwork. Investment partnerships, real estate portfolios, private equity stakes. The earliest filing dated back almost 15 years. Adam leaned against the side of his car and exhaled slowly. 15 years. That meant this wasn't something she had started recently. This was something she had been building quietly during most of their marriage. He tried to remember every conversation they had ever had about money. There hadn't been many. Keisha usually handled the household bills. Adam deposited his paycheck every 2 weeks. The mortgage was always paid. The lights stayed on. Groceries appeared in the refrigerator. The financial side of their life had always felt smooth, stable. He had never questioned it. Why would he? They lived comfortably, but not extravagantly. The brick house on Cedar Hill Drive wasn't large. Their cars were practical. Their vacations had been modest. Keisha had never worn flashy jewelry or talked about expensive things. Adam suddenly remembered a moment from years earlier. One evening he had walked past the spare bedroom and seen Keisha sitting at her desk, surrounded by documents. What are you working on? He had asked casually. Just reviewing some investment reports, she had replied. Adam had nodded and walked away. He never asked another question. At the time, it hadn't seemed important. Now the memory felt different, like a clue he had ignored. Adam slid into his car and started the engine. The drive back across town passed in a blur. His mind replayed the lawyer's words again and again. Your wife appears to be exceptionally skilled. That sentence echoed louder than the others. Not because of the money, but because of what it implied. For 20 years, Adam had believed he was the provider, the one carrying the financial responsibility, the one whose work held their household together. That belief had shaped his identity, his pride, his sense of purpose, and now the truth sitting in that folder suggested something very different. Keisha hadn't just contributed to their life. She had built something extraordinary beside him. Something he had never even noticed. By the time Adam pulled into the apartment complex where Chloe lived, the sky had begun turning orange with sunset. He sat in the car for several minutes before getting out. Upstairs, Chloe was sitting on the couch, scrolling through her phone when he walked in. Hey, she said casually. You're late. Adam dropped the folder onto the kitchen table. Had a meeting downtown. With the lawyer? She asked. Yeah. Chloe stood up and stretched. So, what happens next? Adam hesitated. He hadn't even processed that part yet. Paperwork, he said finally. Financial disclosures. Chloe nodded. That's normal, right? Probably. She walked into the kitchen and opened the refrigerator. Do you want pasta, or should we order something? Adam didn't answer right away. His eyes were still fixed on the folder. Chloe noticed. "What's wrong?" Adam ran a hand through his hair. "The lawyer found something." Chloe leaned against the counter. "What?" Adam opened the folder and slid one of the documents across the table. Chloe stepped closer and looked down. At first she didn't say anything. Then her eyebrows lifted. "Wait, is this real?" Adam nodded slowly. Chloe stared at the page again. $1 billion? Her voice sounded almost disbelieving. "That's what he said." Chloe looked up at him. "You're serious?" Adam nodded again. Chloe let out a short laugh. "That's insane." Adam didn't laugh, because the number itself wasn't what unsettled him most. It was the quiet understanding forming underneath it. Keisha had built this life quietly, without bragging, without announcing it, without ever making Adam feel smaller for not knowing, and he had walked away from her believing she lived inside the same narrow world he did. Chloe pushed the document back across the table. "So what does that mean for the divorce?" Adam shrugged faintly. "I don't know yet." But Chloe's next question came quickly. "Does that mean you get half?" The room went quiet. Adam stared at her for a moment. Not because the question was unreasonable. Divorces often revolved around financial divisions. But hearing it spoken so casually felt strange, because suddenly the money didn't feel like an opportunity. It felt like a mirror, a reflection of how little he had truly understood about the woman he spent 20 years with. Adam closed the folder slowly. "That's not really what I'm thinking about right now." Chloe shrugged. "Well, it's a lot of money." Adam nodded. "Yes," he said quietly, "but that's not the part that's bothering me." Chloe frowned slightly. "What do you mean?" Adam looked down at the table. "For 20 years, he said slowly, I thought I knew exactly who my wife was." He paused, and it turns out I didn't know half of it. The realization settled deeper inside him with every passing minute. Not just that Keisha was successful, but that she had been building something remarkable while standing quietly beside him the entire time, supporting him, encouraging him, never once using her success to make him feel small. Adam leaned back in his chair, and for the first time since leaving the house 2 months earlier, regret began taking a real shape inside his chest. Not loud, not dramatic, just heavy. Like the slow realization that the life you walked away from might have been far more valuable than you ever understood while you still had it. The conversation about Keisha's money didn't stay in the room for long, but it didn't disappear either. Something about it lingered in the apartment over the next few weeks, like a quiet shift in the air. At first, Chloe treated the discovery like an interesting story. Every now and then she would bring it up casually. "I still can't believe you were married to a billionaire and didn't know it," she said one night while scrolling through her phone on the couch. Adam was sitting at the kitchen table reviewing work emails. "Neither can I," he replied without looking up. Chloe laughed lightly. "That's like something out of a movie." Adam didn't respond, because the more time passed, the less entertaining the situation felt to him. The discovery had changed the way he saw his entire marriage, not because of the money itself, but because of what it revealed about Keisha. Her patience, her discipline, the quiet strength it must have taken to build something that significant while living such a simple life. And the more he thought about it, the more uncomfortable a certain question became. How had I missed all of it? Life inside the apartment began to feel different too. At first, living with Chloe had carried a sense of excitement. Late dinners, spontaneous plans, long conversations that stretched late into the night. But as weeks passed, routine began creeping in, just like it does in every relationship. And routines have a way of exposing differences people don't notice in the beginning. One evening, Adam came home from work exhausted. A shipment had been delayed, and he had spent most of the afternoon dealing with frustrated drivers and angry supervisors. All he wanted was a quiet evening. When he walked into the apartment, music was playing loudly from the living room. Chloe and 2 friends were sitting on the couch laughing with glasses of wine in their hands. "Oh, hey," Chloe said brightly when she saw him. Adam forced a small smile. "Hey," her friends waved casually. "Adam, this is Tara and Lindsay," Chloe said. Adam nodded politely. "Nice to meet you." He dropped his keys on the counter and headed for the kitchen. Behind him, the laughter continued. He poured himself a glass of water and leaned against the sink. The apartment suddenly felt crowded. Chloe walked into the kitchen a few minutes later. "You okay?" she asked. "Just tired," Adam said. "You should come sit with us. I think I'm going to take a shower first." Chloe nodded. "All right." The moment seemed harmless, but moments like that started happening more often. Their schedules didn't always line up. Chloe's weekends often involved social events, friends, parties, trips. Adam's weekends usually meant catching up on sleep or taking care of work responsibilities that had spilled over from the week. One Saturday morning, Chloe burst into the bedroom with an excited expression. "My friends are going to Atlanta tonight," she said. Adam sat up slowly. "For what?" "There's a music festival downtown." Adam glanced at the clock. "You mean tonight?" "Yeah," she said. "We'll leave around 6. Adam rubbed his eyes. "I've got work early Monday, so it's a 3-hour drive." Chloe crossed her arms slightly. "You're always worried about work." Adam sighed. "Because I have responsibilities." Chloe tilted her head. "You act like life is supposed to be serious all the time." Adam didn't answer, because that statement revealed something he hadn't fully acknowledged before. For Chloe, life was still something flexible, adventurous, full of possibilities. For Adam, life had always been structured around responsibility, providing, planning, staying stable. Those two mindsets had seemed exciting together at first. Now they were starting to collide. The tension grew slowly. Small disagreements about money, about schedules, about priorities. One evening, while reviewing bills at the kitchen table, Adam noticed something that made him frown. "Did you order furniture?" he asked. Chloe looked up from the couch. "Yeah, for the living room. We needed a bigger coffee table." Adam glanced at the price listed on the receipt. This was $600. Chloe shrugged. "It's nice furniture." Adam stared at the number again. "You should have talked to me first." Chloe's expression shifted slightly. "It's just a table. That's not the point." "Then what is the point?" Adam leaned back in his chair. "The point is, we need to watch what we spend." Chloe stared at him for a moment. Then she laughed softly. "You're worried about $600 when your ex-wife has $1 billion? The sentence landed harder than she expected. Adam's face tightened. "That money isn't mine." "But it could be," Chloe said casually. Adam pushed the receipt across the table. "That's not how I'm thinking about this." Chloe rolled her eyes. "You're being dramatic." Adam didn't respond, because suddenly, the entire conversation felt like something deeper than a disagreement about furniture. It was a glimpse of two completely different ways of seeing life. And for the first time since moving into the apartment, Adam felt something that surprised him. Not excitement, not freedom, something much closer to exhaustion. Later that night, Chloe fell asleep quickly beside him. Adam stayed awake, staring at the ceiling. His mind drifted back to another bedroom, a different house. The quiet rhythm of evenings spent beside someone who understood responsibility the same way he did. Keisha had never argued about money, never pressured him to chase excitement. She valued stability, planning, the same things he had once believed defined a good life. And suddenly, the contrast between those two worlds felt impossible to ignore. Adam turned onto his side and looked across the dark room. The apartment was silent, but the fantasy that had once felt exciting now looked different under the light of everyday life. Because excitement fades quickly once reality begins asking practical questions. And the life Adam thought he had chosen was already beginning to show its cracks. The problem was, by the time those cracks appear, the life you left behind is rarely waiting exactly where you left it. The idea of going back to the house sat in Adam's mind for weeks before he actually did it. At first he pushed the thought away every time it appeared. But the longer life in Chloe's apartment continued, the harder it became to ignore the quiet voice in the back of his mind. It didn't shout. It didn't accuse him. It simply asked a question that kept returning. What if you made the worst mistake of your life? The feeling grew stronger the day he missed Isaiah's school assembly. Adam had meant to attend. He even set a reminder on his phone. But that morning, a shipment issue at the warehouse turned into a 2-hour meeting with upper management. By the time Adam looked at his phone again, the reminder notification had already passed. He stared at the screen for a long moment before slowly placing the phone back on his desk. That afternoon, he sat alone in his office after everyone else had left, thinking about the way Isaiah had looked at him the last time they talked. The boy hadn't been angry, just confused. "Are you still living somewhere else?" Isaiah had asked quietly during their last phone call. Adam hadn't known how to answer that question because the truth was becoming harder to explain. The next few weeks brought more small arguments with Chloe about money, about schedules, about priorities, none of them dramatic, but enough to make Adam realize something important. Excitement fades quickly when real life settles in. One evening, after another tense conversation about finances, Chloe went out with friends while Adam stayed behind in the apartment. He sat alone at the kitchen table staring at the quiet room, the same table where they had once laughed over takeout meals. Now it just felt temporary, like a place he had stopped on the way to somewhere else. Adam leaned back in the chair and closed his eyes. Memories from his old life began surfacing more often lately. Sunday dinners at Loretta's house, Isaiah running across the living room with toy trucks, Keisha standing at the kitchen counter, wiping down the same clean surface for the second time. Those memories didn't feel boring anymore. They felt solid, something steady he had taken for granted. The realization finally reached a point where Adam couldn't ignore it anymore. So, one evening, he grabbed his car keys and left the apartment without telling Chloe where he was going. The drive across Montgomery felt strangely familiar. Street after street passed by like pages from a book he hadn't opened in months. When he turned onto Cedar Hill Drive, his hands tightened slightly on the steering wheel. Nothing about the neighborhood had changed. The same crepe myrtle trees lined the sidewalks. The same porch lights glowed in the early evening. And there, halfway down the street, stood the brick house. Adam parked along the curb and sat in the car for several minutes. The porch light was on. Through the living room window, he could see the soft glow of a lamp. Someone was home. His chest felt heavier than expected as he stepped out of the car. For a moment, he simply stood on the sidewalk, looking at the house he had once walked into every day without thinking. Then he climbed the small set of steps and knocked on the door. Footsteps approached from inside. The door opened. Keisha stood there. She looked exactly the same in some ways. Calm, composed, but something about her posture felt firmer now, like someone who had already finished processing something difficult. For a second, neither of them spoke. Adam finally cleared his throat. "Hi." Keisha nodded slightly. "Hi, Adam." Her voice carried no anger, no warmth either, just quiet acknowledgement. Adam glanced past her into the living room. Isaiah was sitting on the floor building something with Legos. The boy looked up when he heard the voices. "Dad?" Adam felt his chest tighten. "Hey, buddy." Isaiah stood up slowly, but didn't run forward the way he used to. Children sense when the world around them has changed. "I thought you lived somewhere else," Isaiah said. Adam crouched down slightly. "I do right now." Isaiah nodded. Then he looked at Keisha. "Can I keep building?" "Yes," Keisha said gently. Isaiah sat back down and returned to his Legos. Keisha stepped outside onto the porch and closed the door behind her. The cool evening air moved quietly through the neighborhood. Adam rubbed his hands together nervously. "I know I probably shouldn't have just shown up like this." Keisha leaned lightly against the porch railing. "What do you want, Adam?" He hesitated. The words he had practiced in his head suddenly felt inadequate. "I made a mistake," he said finally. Keisha watched him silently. "The worst mistake of my life." The sentence hung in the air between them. Adam took a slow breath. "I thought I knew what I wanted," he continued. "I thought I needed something different." Keisha's expression didn't change. "But I was wrong," he said quietly. He looked down at the porch floor for a moment before meeting her eyes again. "I want my family back." The words sounded fragile, even to him, because deep down, Adam already suspected the truth. Some doors don't open again once they've been closed. But he had come anyway, because not trying would have meant carrying the question for the rest of his life. And sometimes the hardest part of regret isn't the mistake itself. It's realizing too late how valuable the life you walked away from actually was. The evening air on the porch felt cooler than Adam expected. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The quiet between them wasn't angry. It was the kind of silence that happens when two people already understand something that hasn't been said yet. Keisha rested one hand lightly on the porch railing and looked out at the street. Down the block, a neighbor was walking their dog. A car passed slowly, headlights sweeping across the trees. Life in the neighborhood continued like nothing unusual had happened. Adam shifted his weight. I know I hurt you, he said. Keisha didn't interrupt. I know I hurt Isaiah too. Still, she said nothing. Adam ran a hand through his hair. When I left, I thought I was chasing something that would make my life feel different. Keisha turned her head slightly. And did it? Adam hesitated. At first it felt exciting, he admitted. But excitement doesn't last. Keisha nodded slowly. No, she said. It usually doesn't. Adam looked down at the porch floor. I didn't understand that when I left. He took a slow breath before continuing. I also didn't understand you. Keisha's eyes rested on him quietly. I went to a lawyer a few weeks ago, Adam said. Her expression didn't change. For the divorce paperwork. Keisha nodded. I assumed that would happen eventually. Adam swallowed. That's when I found out about the investments. For the first time that evening, something shifted slightly in Keisha's eyes. Not surprise, just acknowledgement. So you know, she said. Yes. Adam let out a short breath. I had no idea. Keisha didn't look proud or embarrassed. She simply said, You never asked. The sentence was calm, but it carried the quiet truth of 20 years. Adam shook his head slowly. I thought I understood our life, he said. You understood the part you were paying attention to, Keisha replied gently. The honesty in her voice made it difficult for him to argue. Adam leaned against the porch railing beside her. I spent years thinking I was the one holding everything together financially. Keisha looked back toward the street. I never needed you to be responsible for everything, she said. Adam stared at her. Why didn't you tell me? Keisha took a moment before answering. Because I wanted to know something important. What? That you loved me without money being part of the equation. Adam felt something tighten in his chest. And I did love you. Keisha nodded. I believe you did. Adam frowned slightly. Did. She turned and looked directly at him now. The man I married valued the life we built together. Adam's throat felt dry. And the man standing here now? He asked quietly. Keisha didn't answer immediately. Instead, she asked a question of her own. Why did you really come here tonight? Adam didn't hesitate this time. Because I realized I made a mistake. Keisha studied his face. You realized that after the excitement wore off? Adam winced slightly. That's not fair, isn't it? Her voice remained calm. You didn't leave because our marriage was abusive. Adam shook his head. You didn't leave because you were unhappy for years. No. You left because someone younger made you feel admired. Adam opened his mouth, then closed it again, because the truth sitting between them was difficult to argue with. Keisha nodded slowly. That kind of attention can be intoxicating. Adam looked away. But attention isn't the same as love, she continued. No, Adam admitted quietly. And excitement isn't the same as commitment. Adam rubbed his hands together. I know that now. Keisha held his gaze for a long moment. That's good, she said softly. But knowing it now doesn't undo what happened. Adam felt the weight of those words settle heavily in his chest. I was hoping maybe we could rebuild things. Keisha looked toward the front door behind her. Inside, Isaiah's small voice could be heard humming quietly while he played. You didn't just leave me, she said gently. You left the stability our son depended on. Adam swallowed. I know. You chose uncertainty for him. Adam's shoulders dropped slightly. I didn't think about it that way at the time. That's part of the problem, Keisha said. The words weren't angry, just honest. Adam stared at the porch railing. So, that's it? He asked quietly. Keisha didn't answer right away. She looked back toward the street again. Then she said something that sounded almost like a reflection, more than a decision. When someone shows you who they are under temptation, you have to believe them. Adam felt his chest tighten again. I'm not that man, he said. Keisha shook her head gently. You were. The truth in her voice made it impossible to argue. Another long silence passed. Finally, Adam asked the question he had been avoiding. You're saying there's no chance? Keisha met his eyes. I'm saying trust is the foundation of a marriage. Adam nodded slowly. And once that foundation breaks, she continued, the house built on top of it can't stand the same way again. Adam looked at the door behind her. Inside that house was the life he had once called his own. Family dinners, quiet evenings, a child who still believed his parents could fix anything. but the distance between him and that life felt wider now than the sidewalk below the porch. Keisha reached for the door handle. "You should still be part of Isaiah's life," she said gently. Adam nodded. "I want that." "And you will," she said. But then she added something that carried the finality of a closed chapter. "Just not the way you were before." Adam stood there quietly as she opened the door. Before stepping inside, Keisha looked back at him one last time. "You didn't lose this marriage because of a young woman," she said softly. Adam frowned slightly. "Then why?" Keisha held his gaze. "Because somewhere along the way, you stopped valuing the life we built." The door closed gently behind her, and Adam stood alone on the porch, understanding something that came too late. The mistake he made wasn't chasing excitement. It was forgetting the value of the stability he already had. Years passed, not in a dramatic way, just the slow, steady movement of time that reshapes people's lives without asking permission. Isaiah grew taller. The small Lego towers that once covered the living room floor were eventually replaced by school projects, basketball shoes near the door, and textbooks stacked on the kitchen table. Through all of it, the brick house on Cedar Hill Drive remained the same. Keisha kept the routines that mattered. Sunday mornings still meant church. Sunday afternoons still meant dinner at Loretta's house, where the kitchen stayed full of laughter and the smell of something cooking on the stove. Isaiah spent those years growing up surrounded by people who valued consistency. And Keisha made sure of one thing: her son would never grow up believing that love was something temporary. On weekday afternoons, she helped him with homework at the same kitchen table where Adam once drank his morning coffee. "Check your math again," she would say, sliding the notebook back toward him. Isaiah groaned dramatically. "I already did." "Then check it one more time." He sighed, but picked up the pencil again. Moments like that filled their house. Simple conversations, quiet discipline, small lessons repeated over time. The same way Loretta had once taught Keisha. Keisha's work continued too, but the wealth she had built never changed the way she lived. Her office remained the spare bedroom down the hall. Stacks of financial reports sat beside family photos on the desk. Conference calls happened in the same quiet room where Adam had once passed by without asking many questions. Over the years, however, something new began to grow alongside her business work. Community projects. It started small. One scholarship for students from the west side of Montgomery who needed help paying for college. Then another. Eventually, Keisha began quietly funding mentorship programs for young people who needed guidance the way she once had. Loretta liked to tease her about it. "You're turning into the whole city's big sister," she said once while stirring a pot of greens in the kitchen. Keisha laughed. "Someone helped me get here." "That someone was you working your tail off," Loretta replied. Keisha smiled, but didn't argue, because she understood something her mother had taught her long ago. Success meant very little if it didn't help someone else climb. Meanwhile, Adam's life moved forward too, but differently. The relationship with Chloe didn't last long after the arguments began. The age gap that once felt exciting slowly revealed deeper differences, different priorities, different expectations. Eventually, the excitement that had drawn them together faded completely. By the time the relationship ended, Adam had already begun understanding something painful. The problem had never really been Chloe. The problem had been the way he misunderstood his own life. Years later, Adam still worked in logistics, still managing shipments and warehouse schedules, still waking up early every morning. But the quiet reflection that followed his divorce stayed with him. He remained part of Isaiah's life: school events, basketball games, occasional weekend visits. The relationship between father and son rebuilt itself slowly over time. Not perfectly, but honestly. One afternoon when Isaiah was about 16, they sat together in the bleachers after a basketball practice. The gym had emptied out. The sound of bouncing basketballs echoed faintly in the background. Isaiah sat beside him, tying his shoes. "Dad?" he said. Adam looked over. "Yeah?" Isaiah hesitated for a moment. "Why did you leave back then?" Adam stared at the gym floor. For years he had wondered when that question would finally come. He could have chosen an easier answer, but something inside him refused to do that. "I made a mistake," he said quietly. Isaiah frowned slightly. "What kind of mistake?" Adam leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees. "The kind people make when they confuse attention with love." Isaiah thought about that. Mom says character shows when things get hard. Adam nodded slowly. She's right. Isaiah stood up and grabbed his basketball. Well, he said, bouncing it lightly once. I guess people learn. Adam watched him walk across the gym toward the exit. And in that moment, he realized something important. Isaiah had grown up learning his mother's lessons. Discipline, integrity, responsibility. The same values Adam had once believed defined him. But now, he understood something deeper. Those values don't just come from words. They come from choices. Back on Cedar Hill Drive, Keisha still lived in the same brick house surrounded by crepe myrtle trees. Some evenings she sat on the porch watching the sunset while Isaiah finished homework inside. Life had changed in ways she never expected, but it had also become clearer. One evening a friend asked her something during a quiet conversation after church. Do you ever regret not taking him back? The woman asked gently. Keisha thought about the question for a moment. Then she shook her head. Regret usually comes from wishing things were different, she said, and I don't wish for that. Her friend tilted her head. Why not? Keisha looked down the quiet street. Because people reveal who they are through their choices. She paused before adding something that had become one of the most important lessons of her life. Forgiveness is possible, she said softly, but trust is something people have to protect before it breaks. Inside the house, Isaiah called out from the kitchen. Mom, did you finish the grocery list? Keisha smiled and stood up from the porch. I'm coming. And that was the life she chose. Not revenge, not bitterness, just clarity. Because the real lesson of her story was never about wealth or betrayal. It was about something far simpler. Attention can feel like love. Excitement can feel like meaning. But loyalty is proven when temptation appears. And sometimes the greatest loss in life happens when someone fails to recognize the value of the person standing quietly beside them all along. Before you go, I want to ask you something. If you were in Keisha's position, would you have given Adam a second chance? Some people believe a mistake shouldn't define a person. Others believe trust, once broken, can never be rebuilt the same way again. There's no easy answer, and that's what makes stories like this feel so real. So tell me honestly in the comments, was Keisha right to close that door? Or should she have forgiven him and tried again? I read your thoughts every day, and some of the most powerful conversations happen right there in the comments. And if this story made you think about loyalty, choices, and the people we sometimes take for granted, don't forget to like the video and subscribe so you don't miss the next story, because the next one might hit even closer to home.
Thank you for watching Mr. Graham Stories, my beautiful, amazing family.